new thing this year is to have a open-ended question. And they're doing this because they're not doing multiple choice, and they want to see if people know more than just writing the code. So it's never been done. Now, first of all, I uploaded this, put this in Google Classroom. It's their sample questions. And we may actually do these, but I just want to show you, I may have scrolled too far, but here we go. Here's what one of the open-ended questions looks like. And it says, okay, what if we wanted to add another method? So parts A and B implemented two methods like a normal FRQ, but here they're doing a hypothetical. If you want to add this method, how would you do that? And basically, you're supposed to write a paragraph. Don't make it verbose. Don't make it any longer than it has to be. But you need to make sure you write the method header for the new method. What parameters it has to take, what the return type is, make sure it's public. If you have to add instance variables to the class to make it work, do so. I will say, students tend to add more instance variables than necessary. Like we want our variables to have as small a scope as is possible. And so if a local variable will do, then don't make a new instance variable. So kind of think that way. But you need to describe any instance variables. And if you have more instance variables, you're going to need a new constructor. And it says other methods. I mean, maybe you'd make a helper method for this. You don't have to necessarily, but it might make sense. And one thing to emphasize is, like it says here, do not write any code. That is not what you're doing here. Okay, it's not selecting. And so that's the basic idea behind these open-ended questions. Now, I was going to go through the first assignment for the week, the ElectricCar assignment. And so basically, you're storing a table of costs. And so the cost of charging your car for an hour varies during the day, depending on usage, presumably. And so, this is military time. So 1,300 hours is 1 p.m., 1 in the afternoon. And apparently that's the peak time. So that's our goal. We're supposed to write two methods. First of all, here's the battery charger class. Notice the only instance variable it has right now is an array that is that table I just showed you. And then you're supposed to implement these two methods to get charging cost and to get charge start time. Now the first one, the get charging cost, you're going to be given, here, first of all, you're given a start hour and a charge time as inputs, and you're supposed to find out how much it's going to cost. And so depending on what the inputs are. So like right here, if you start at, let me get it. Okay, sorry, I was reading it wrong. If you look at this, you start at, if you charge them for 12 hours and you start at hour 1, then it includes that and the last hour. And so that's, that's 12 hours clearly. And so, things like that, you gotta be careful sometimes, just what they mean. And so now here, if we start at hour 0, the beginning, midnight basically, and charge for 2 hours, then we'd be charging for that hour, and then hour 1. And so I guess my point is, if you start at at 0 and add 2, you'd be at 2, but that's not what we're thinking. We're thinking during those 2 hours, hour 0 and hour 1. Now the big point is that if you start later in the day and the number of hours extends to the next day, then you've got to account for that. Here, let me just get to this. Your preconditions, once again, you can assume that those are true. You don't have to check for that. Usually they do nice preconditions like this where you can assume it's no funny business. No negative times, no negative charge times. So let's look at these, like this example here. If you want to start at hour 22 and go for 7 hours, then you basically just need to sum up this 80 and this 60, and then all these up to 7 hours. So these 5 here, all the way up to the 80 at hour 4. What I want you to appreciate is clearly you're going to have a loop, but your loop is not controlled really by where you're at in the array. Your loop would be controlled by how many hours you've charged. And so you need 2 variables, one to keep track of what spot in the array you're at, and one to keep track of how many hours you've been charging. And like I said, you just your loop here. Let me hold on a second. I'm trying a new tablet for drawing purposes. So let's see. Okay, it's a little thicker than. And so, like I said, loop, as long as hours is less than charge time, that's a less than symbol. Imagine that's capital T. And then, of course, you need a sum, or total hours, and you just total up the charge time for each of those hours. Yeah, it's rate table. And I'm missing stuff. Now, I need another variable, another local variable up here. And so what would I start at? Well, whatever the starting hour is. And I'm not going to give it all away, but that's the basic layout you'd want to do. Now, that's the first method you're supposed to create. The second method is the get charge start time. And you're supposed to find, if you want to charge for a certain amount of time, when should you start? And basically, here, you have one parameter, the amount of time, number of hours you want to charge for, and it's supposed to return the minimum cost. And it says that here, you can assume the charge times are positive, and it returns an optimal start time, which would be, actually, I said it returns a cost. No, it returns the time that would cost at least. So clearly, you make a variable to store the minimum cost, maybe called min cost. And this time, we really do need to loop through the whole array. And now, how are you going to figure out the cost at a certain time? Well, we just did that. And so you're going to call the get charging cost. Now, the get charging cost, you need to give it 2 things, a starting hour and a charge time. And so I'm saying you'll call inside your loop, you call the get charging cost and for start time, and then that charging time, and it will tell you the cost for that spot, and if that's less than the minimum, then you make that the minimum. Although really you need to store 2 things, and so you need the minimum cost up here, and I'll just call it this way. You can make different variable names. You need the location minimum cost and the actual minimum cost that you found so far. And so you need the minimum, minimum cost for comparison purposes, but you're supposed to return the location, so you have to keep track of that as well. That's the basic idea behind this thing. Now, I added on a part C, and frankly, I feel like this could be, well, it's open-ended. So really, as long as what you come up with as an answer makes sense for what you were given, it can be very valid. And that's one thing to appreciate in this. There's not one answer. And if you look at what you're given here, there's a lot missing from the battery charger class. In other words, you're not told what instance variables there are. Well, you know it has one, but as it says down here, there may be instance variables, constructors, and methods that are not shown. So since you don't know anything beyond what is here, add as many instance variables as you need. You can't assume any instance variables exist other than what we were told. So add them if you need them. So for this to work, to be able to compute, how much longer the battery is going to last, well, you need to somehow know how long the battery is lasting, or how much charge it has, and also the rate of depletion. I guess if you're talking about possibilities, if you look at these methods we just made, they really did all their work based on just two things: the parameters and that table. There were no other instance variables. Okay. Well, my point is, one way to do this is to basically essentially make a static method that it takes everything as inputs and returns the answer as an output. In which case, you would not need any more instance variables. I'm just saying that's the possibility. Another possibility is to make your battery charger class store things like the current charge of the battery and the rate of depletion, and then have your method act on those instance variables. In my mind, they're both valid approaches, and so just think it through and write a paragraph describing it, and just make sure, as it says here, you should have a proper method header for the method, including parameters and return type. And if you are making any new variables, instance variables, make sure you say their type. Variables should be private, methods should be public. I would include that. And you're not supposed to be writing code, so you're going to convey that information in a sentence instead, which frankly would be less efficient than just writing the code. But that's the task. You have a limited amount of time, so I was going to say you might try writing some code and then describing it, but obviously don't try to flesh it out. Just try to kind of think things through, what code you would actually write. Any questions so far? There's one more thing I just want to mention. When you get to the second FRQ, it's not horrible, but it does have several classes involved. And so, like right here, this is the trip FRQ. And so you have a time class that presumably stores a time, and it has a minutes until method. So it can tell you how many minutes from this time to another time. And if you look at the examples, that it'll be a number of minutes that might be positive or negative. Then you have a flight class that has two methods that return time objects, and it gives you the departure time and arrival time. So that's all you know about a flight, is you can get its departure and arrival. And then you have a trip, which stores an array list of flights. And you can see just from that how you're going to start piecing this together. You need to get a flight from the array list, and then when you get a flight, you can call its methods to get its arrival time and departure time. And then once you get one of those time objects, you can call its minutes until. So really, in terms of piecing it together, is not horrible. You just have to get that idea that you have different classes with different methods, and you need to see how they're interconnected, how you use one inside of another.